Hello and welcome to Matt's Reloading Bench. In this video, I will be machining new Lapua brass for my 6.5 PRC. I will quick go over my 10-step process that I use for machining new brass. If you've seen my video on the 224 Valkyrie brass prep, you will see that the process is very similar, just with new, not fired brass. There's a few extra steps that are involved. Step 1. I'm going to resize the brass with my Hornady custom grade sizing die with the expander mandrel installed on the central rod. Step 2 will be trimming them to length using my L.E. Wilson case trimmer. To use that, we have to have the proper case holder for the cartridge. Step 3, I will be deburring the case mouth using my Frankfurt Arsenal brass prep station. Step 4, I will be neck turning all the brass. When I neck turn the brass, I want to make sure that when I am uniforming the thickness of the neck wall, that at least 90% of the outside surface of this case neck is consistent. I know you may ask, well, why not just make sure that 100% of the case neck has contact with the neck turning tool? I don't feel that it's necessary to take off that much brass off of the thickness of the case neck. I've done it with 100% removal, and I've done it with as low as 75-ish% removal. I feel that I get the exact same results anywhere between 90 and 100% of the brass being uniformed on the thickness of that neck wall. So that's just how I've come up with that number. I'm not saying that's what you have to do if you choose to mirror my steps. I'm just saying this is what I do and it works for me. Step 5, I'm going to uniform all the primer pockets using this tool connected to a drill. Step 6, I'm going to uniform and deburr the flash hole using my K&M flash hole uniforming tool. Step 7, I'm going to clean all the brass to get all of the sizing oil off of it. Step 8 is going to be using the match grade sizing die with the proper bushing to get about 3/1000 neck tension on the bullet with the brass. I will go over that in detail when we get to that step. Step 9, I will clean the brass again, and in this instance with the Lapua brass, I will be done at that point. Other brass, I will go on to step 10, which is annealing. Lapua brass, I know, comes from the manufacturer already annealed, so I have no reason to do it a second time. So with all that being said, I will start to get into going over each of these steps one at a time, showing you exactly what I do, how I do it, and why I do it. For step 1, I'm going to be using the Hornady custom grade sizing die. I don't actually want to use the entirety of the die. I am actually just using it for the ball mandrel on the center spindle. The reason being is I need to get the inside dimension of the neck expanded out with that ball mandrel so that it properly fits onto the mandrel for the neck turning tool. So I'm only going to thread the die down far enough so that the ball mandrel on the center spindle just goes past the case mouth. That way I'm guaranteeing that none of the rest of the brass will be contacted and the dimensions will not be changed. So to do that, I will grab some Imperial dry lube, and I will just put the case, dip the case neck in there like so. Put it on the case holder, raise the ram, and I am going to thread the die down. So I can feel that I've got contact with the inside of the case neck right now, and I will thread this down until I feel no resistance right there. Okay, so I can thread this freely. Okay, I know that the expander mandrel is past the inside surface of the case neck and is now going into the body of the cartridge itself. So at this point, I will lower the ram, screw my lock ring down, and tighten it to lock it in place. Some may call this a little bit of an unorthodox method. The reason that I am doing this is because I do not have an expander mandrel die. Doing this pretty much does exactly the same thing. You get the same end result, and I don't have to purchase a separate die to complete this process. Because like I said, right now, my only goal is to make the inside of the case mouth large enough so that it fits on the mandrel of the case neck turning tool. So that one is done. We will keep the dry lube right here. And that's it. Boom. So I will finish neck sizing the rest of these cartridges, and then we'll move on to the next step. I've got the case trimmer mounted to my workbench, and looking at the information in the Hornady loading manual, it says that the case trim length should be 2.015 inches. Right now, all the cases measure out to 2.02, so I'll be taking roughly 5 thousandths off in length. So we've got it set up, and so far I've got it where the cutting head does not quite touch the case mouth. So I will loosen that and turn this in 5 thousandths, because the reason being is, even if it's just touching, 5 thousandths is how much material we need to take off anyway at most. So I will give it a shot there. We've made contact. I'm going to take my caliper and check the measurement. We are at 2.018 inches, so I need to take off 3/10 yet. 1, 2, 3. I'll put this back in there. And we will see what we have now. I have 2.015 inches. So right where we need to be. So I will lock this in. That way the adjuster cannot travel while we are using it. Everything is set right where it needs to be, and I will go ahead and run all of my brass. measure this one right away. 2.015. Same as the last. So we are good to go. I will trim all these, and once I'm done, we'll move on to the next step, which is deburring all the case mouths. I'll be using my Frankfurt Arsenal case prep tool. It's real easy. I'm going to first deburr the outside of the case mouth and then the inside of the case mouth. It doesn't take much, just a quick touch, and that's all that's needed. All right, guys, I've got my Hornady neck turning tool all set up here. So when I do this, I will start with it backed off and slowly work my way down until the cutter just starts to kiss the outside surface of that case neck. And not everything is going to be shaved off, so it's not going to look uniform. So I have an unturned piece of brass in here right now. I'm going to quick turn it, and I will show you exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so you see as I'm turning this, you can see where the case neck has shiny areas and not shiny areas. The shiny area is where the cutter has removed material off of the outside of the case neck, and the dull areas where it hasn't quite touched it yet. When I'm doing this, I like to get it to have at least 90 to 95% of the outside of that case where it is shiny. So I'm going to drop down the cutter one notch, and we will try it again and see where we end up. All right, so now when we turn this real slow, you can see, let me grab something to point with. You can see where all this is shiny, and then right here is the only dull looking spot. So if I turn this slow, you can see that I've got fresh brass pretty much completely around the entirety of the surface, except for this one spot right there at the very end of the case mouth. For me, that's pretty much all I'm looking for, because it's not just the very opening of the case mouth that holds the bullet, it's the entire length, okay? So I would say at least 95% of this case mouth has been turned, and that's what I'm looking for. So I will take this piece of brass out, put in another one just to make sure that we've got consistency. And I am looking, and it looks like the bit is just touching the surface over here. And on this part of the case neck, it looks like it's all fresh, clean brass. That's probably not even 1/1000th of a difference in neck thickness. And I'm going to consider that case neck turned to where I want it. Try one more. Alright, so now with this one, there's quite a large area that has not been touched. So right here on this part, it's completely turned with all brand new shiny brass showing. And over here, there's quite a large area where it's not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down the cutter one more click. And I'm going to return this piece of brass and see where we get. And if I like it, I'm going to go back and turn the other 3 pieces that I've already done so that everything is at the same thickness. And I'm going to say that is as far as I'm going to go, because now that case neck is 100% all fresh brass turned. So real quick, I'll go back, redo the other pieces of brass that I've already done. And that brass too is showing completely turned on the case neck. And that one too is 100% turned. So now I'm going to get out all the stuff that I've done up until this point in regards to expanding the case necks using the expander ball on the custom grade die, trimming all the cases to length. That all plays a part in what's happening right here. If you look at the very end right there, what ends up happening is the case mouth makes final contact with that. Hear that? That's your stop point. All right. So if your cases are not uniform and they are not trimmed to the same length, what will end up happening is your cutter bit will end up starting to dig into the shoulder. Okay. I have an exaggerated version of that. If you look at the difference between these two, you can see on here, the shiny part hits the shoulder and goes about halfway through the shoulder. On a proper set case, it stops right where the case neck meets the case shoulder. That's exactly what you're looking for. You don't want to be digging into the case shoulder, but you don't want to fall short of it either. So you got to make sure that when you are turning your case necks, that it's all the way from the mouth just until it kisses the shoulder. The one with the messed up shoulder, that is a result of not having things properly tightened and a lack of lubrication. What ended up happening is, while this was spinning on the mandrel, there was not enough lube, and it actually started to spin the entire mandrel and the locking post for that mandrel. So make sure that you've got your locking knob here properly tightened, and make sure that you have your main arbor post where the mandrel threads into tightened into the back of the apparatus. Okay, guys, that was about a $2 oops that only took all but 2 seconds. That's why it's very important to pay attention to what you're doing, take your time, use proper lubrication, and make sure all your tooling's tight. I've got all 100 pieces of brass machined. My next step is going to be uniforming the primer pockets. I have the primer pocket uniforming tool made by RCBS in my drill, and all I have to do is insert it into the primer pocket, and let the drill hog out whatever material it needs to. I have the depth of the cutting tool set that I use on all of my brass, so that way I know that my primers are all set to a specific depth. I always like to hit the same piece of brass twice. The reason being is there may have been material on the cutters that prevented it from going as deep as it needed to, so I always remove the cutter from the primer pocket, and then I'll put it back in, do a second boring. I've finished up uniforming the primer pockets. Now the next step is going to be deburring the flash holes. So you're not deburring from the outside here. You're going to be deburring through the case mouth, down, and into the cartridge. I took that K&N tool and removed the finger turn and put it into my drill just like so. So now all I have to do is insert it into the brass, find the flash hole, and just give it a light spin. That is all that's needed. The inside of the flash hole is deburred. So I will go ahead and do the other 99 pieces of brass, and then after that we'll be cleaning everything. Now we're on to the first cleaning of the brass. I always make sure that I clean my brass for a minimum of 15 minutes before I run it through the sizing die. The reason being is I want to make sure that all of the metal shavings are off of the brass before I run them through that die, because I don't want to push chunks of brass and basically adhere them to the inside surfaces of that sizing die, because that can change the outcome for all the pieces of brass after that if that chunk is interfering with how the die is actually supposed to function. So I will take all of my brass and I'm going to run it for anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes. I'll see you then. The brass has been tumbled in corncob media now for about 30 minutes or so, and I'm going to run it through the separator and we will start the resizing process. Now that we've got the brass separated from the media, I've got them set up on my loading blocks. I'm going to go ahead and use my Hornady one-shot case lube, and I'm going to go and spray all my brass down. Now I'll come from the other side and do the same. Now that we're ready to start setting up the bushing resizing die, we need to find out what size bushing we're going to end up using. There's a couple of different measurements that we need to take to make sure that we are using the proper bushing size. One, we're going to need to know the diameter of the bullet itself. .263. .263. .263. And I'll check one more just to make sure. 0.263. So we will write that down. Then we also need to know the thickness of the case neck of our brass. A little hard to do without this being in a vise. But we're right around 15 thousandths of an inch, just slightly under. So in regards to the neck thickness, you need to multiply that by 2. So we're going to go with 0.3. Going to add those up. You got 0.293. And then we want to make sure that we've got at least 3 thousandths of neck tension. And you also want to take into consideration that there might be roughly about 1/1000th of an inch of spring back. So I like to add that in as well. So I will actually subtract 4 thousandths. And that will give us 0.289. So that is the bushing size that I am going to be using, 0.289 inches. 289. I don't know if you can see the number, but it's right up top right here, okay? So what we will do is drop the bushing with the numbers up into the die, and then we will take the cap with the center punch rod and screw that in and just hand tighten it. Now, one thing that you've noticed is I did not have a decapping pin on the decapping rod. The reason being is these aren't fired rounds. No sense in wearing out a decapping pin when you don't need to. So we will go ahead and get this set up in the press. We've got the bushing die set up with the 0.289 bushing in it. And when we run the new brass through this resizer, I'm not wanting to change too much to the brass. I'm basically just looking for having the neck resized. I don't really want to change the shoulder all that much, because the less that the brass has to expand, the better. So I'm actually going to set up my die a little bit different. In the directions it says to thread it all the way down until it touches the case mouth. Just like so. And that's Sammy's spec. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to back it off a little bit. Tighten the lock ring and run a piece of brass through. Before I run that brass through, I'm going to check the shoulder measurement, which appears to be 1.7205. So we will run that through. And let's check it again. All right, 1.7205. And we've got 0.290 for our outside neck diameter, which is right where we figured it was going to end up with that bounce back or spring back. I'm going to leave this set up just the way it is. So I'm going to tighten the screw on the lock ring. And that way the die is not going to move anywhere. And I'm going to go ahead and start resizing all this brass. All the brass is resized. Now I'm going to go ahead, run it through the corncob media tumbler, and then after that, the separator, and then I will put it through the sonic cleaner. We've got the heat setting turned on. Want to make sure that all the brass is underneath the fluid level. Got our degas setting. I'm going to run it for 30 minutes. And we'll be back when that's ready to go. The sonic cleaner is done doing its thing. Now I'm going to go take the brass, rinse it, and then we'll put it in the air dryer. Now that we've got the brass rinsed, I did a pat down dry with some paper towel before I'm putting them on here, just to reduce the possibility of water spots on the brass. Start a second tier. Turn it on. Then put the lid on, and this will probably go for roughly 90 minutes to 2 hours. All right, it's been 2 hours, and the brass is completely dry. So at this point, I'm just going to let it cool down, which only takes a few minutes, and I'll be able to start prepping for doing some loads. So this concludes how I prepare all my brand new unfired brass. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, make sure you let me know and hit that subscribe button so that I can keep you up to date when I have new videos coming out. Until next time, shoot straight and be safe.